I guess, was still going to high school. And so we came to Lincoln, Maine. Why? Because my father, who was a barber, couldn't find any work. And apparently Ralph Arnold Folsom Jr. made acquaintance with Charlie Mitten. And Charlie Mitten needed a barber. And he would pay $7 a week. So that's why we got up at midnight in the winter, in the cold and snow, and drove all night to Lincoln, Maine. How far is it? Well, Lincoln is 48 miles north of Bangor, and Bangor is 180 miles to Presque Isle. It would be 130 miles. And there I was in 3rd grade. And we learned multiplication tables. We had a Valentine party. And in the fall, when the leaves were so numerous, we were playing in the school playground, and I was on my back on the ground, playing in the leaves, and then 2 boys, face to face with their hands on each other's shoulders, were in tandem, and they were walking in tandem, and the heel of one of the boys struck my forehead, and I have that bump today. Nothing ever came from it. I believe Ralph Arnold Folsom Jr., my brother, fell from the rafters onto a concrete floor in one of the potato warehouses and had a huge bump on his head the rest of his life, on the forehead. I remember 4th grade, Miss Burr, and long division, and I was 9 years old in Lincoln, Maine. And I colored a picture, and they put it in the drugstore window because I colored it so nicely. It was a George Washington cherry tree picture. There was a Ford dealer, and that big yellow house was behind the Ford dealer's house. And not far from that was a dump, the town dump. I would say only a couple 100 feet. And Newberries used to throw out their rubbish, and we used to go through the town dump and see if we couldn't find something to play with. I remember Ralph Arnold Folsom Jr., my brother, lost his watch, and I found it in the spring when the snow melted, the ice melted. And he was going with a girl named Feeney. Merle Feeney. And he smoked so much. Smoked cigarettes. I remember the cars. 1933, 34. I remember playing marbles. We called them glassies. And it was a great wealth to collect marbles. And Gordon used to go out. You use clay so as to protect the glassies. And when you won the game on clay marbles, then you traded the glassies.
10 clays for one
upholstery tack
one
in the screen door. And Gordon was fooling around and with the tack in the screen door, and he inhaled the tack. He inhaled the upholstery tack. I remember the Lincoln library. Charlie Mitten and Mrs. Mitten were nice to us. So in that summer of 4th grade, and I said I was 9, all right, so that would be 1935. Heavy depression. The WPA, the Workmen's Project, whatever it was, administration, the CCC, the conservation camps, all Roosevelt methods to lift us out of the depression. There was a movie house in Lincoln. I never went.
Never went.
In the summer, I believe my father got a job at the Bangor House, the big fancy hotel in Bangor. And they had their own barber shop. And he got a job as a barber there, and I believe we moved from Lincoln to Bangor, 48 miles south, Penobscot County. At 357 or 358 something Ohio Street. And I entered 5th grade at 10 years old at the Bower Street School, and a very nasty teacher. So now we're up to 5th grade, Bangor, Maine.
Her name was Munson. No, that was a nice teacher. That was in Bangor, 3rd grade. Who was that bad teacher in 5th grade?
10 years old, 1938. So we'll try to do a little bit of this every day. Right now it's 10 after 7, and I have to telephone 10 people. I think it was a 2-room schoolhouse. 4th grade and 5th grade in the same room? Maybe not. I remember Baxter's beans. I remember B&M beans. I remember my mother would bake beans on Saturday, all day Saturday. We'd eat beans Saturday night, Sunday morning, Monday noon, and Wednesday night. My mother and father used to go to play bridge, auction bridge. Dora LeBrie and Ralph LeBrie, people that they knew years ago in Bangor. Ralph and Dora LeBrie and Ray Hudson.
Roy.
And his wife Eva. And then there was a couple who lived way down in the woods behind our house. You couldn't get there by car or by driveway. You had to walk a path. And every Saturday night, they would have beans and pineapple cabbage salad and hot rolls. And they'd play auction bridge. And my mother and father were the only ones who had a young child, and I had to go. No babysitters in those days. .373 Ohio Street, was it? It was a house that was on the corner of Ohio Street and Court Street. Court Street walked right into the city, right into downtown. Not very far. And there was a neighborhood A&P. You know, there was either a Finest or an A&P. And this one was an A&P, a one-room store. That's where Mother did her shopping. I remember shelling peas in the summertime, snapping green beans in the summertime. I remember Helene and my mother making a quilt up on the 3rd floor in the attic in the summertime. It was so hot up there. It was so hot. I remember going to bed and waiting until Helene put out the overhead light, and then it would cool down some. I remember being given a little Orphan Annie watch. Mm-hmm. It was a duplex house, 3 floors, as I've just told you. And we didn't know the people who lived on the other side. That's Sebastian sneezing. It's nothing to sneeze at, Sebastian. I remember Gordon trying to build a vehicle for the soapbox derby. Benny's store, variety store, was 4 houses up the street. Across the street was a small grocery store. And they gave me great big pieces of paper from a great big roller, the paper they used to wrap groceries in. I remember receiving a pair of roller skates for Christmas, and even though it was winter, there was a time when the sidewalks were dry, and I tried roller skating down the sidewalk on Court Street to the Garlands. The Garlands were very rich people, meaning, of course, that they got their money either probably from lumber. And across from the Garlands was the Coe Estate. And that's where I was to go to school in 6th grade. A 2-room schoolhouse. Up the street a ways was a standpipe. That would be the water tower. And there was a round building around it, and it had stairs, and they would open it, and you could go up on the balcony, and it was on top of the hill. And you could see quite a few things. It was in the park on Ohio Street, further up, opposite Smith Street, where we were to live in a few years. You could buy penny candy at Benny's. You could buy 1 cent piece of vanilla fudge. You could buy for 1 cent a black and a red. Gum, ball of gum.
Jawbreaker.
For 1 cent.
No, 2. 2 for 1 cent.
The sign said on it, box 1 cent. If you went down Ohio Street, you would come to Hamden Street, and that was another street out of downtown, and it was up a hill, and there was a church on the corner, and there were Cassidy houses. Cassidy was a rich family, and I don't know how they made.
No, Glennie, that was Union Street. Hamden Street, you had to go farther. You had to go down Union Street to get to Bangor House and Main Street became Hamden Street. No?
Their money, probably in lumber. Anyway, if you went down to the foot of Ohio Street and you turned right, you were on Hamden Street. And Hamden Street that's wrong. You go down the foot of Ohio Street and you turn left and went down Hamden Street Hill.
It was Union Street, and it was Route 2A, and it went to Herman, and then it went across the state to Lewiston and Augusta.
No, that's wrong. Yeah, it wasn't Hamden Street.
If you go down to the foot of Ohio Street, it came into Union Street, I think. And then you had to go through a little tiny back street to get onto Union Street, which went to Main Street, which went to Hamden Street.
What street was it? And you came to the Bangor house on the corner of Main Street and Hamden.
No, Union.
Seemed to me Union Street was there at the top of the hill. And if you turned right, away from the city, you were on Hamden Street, and Hamden Street went to Hamden. Hamden Corners. Quite a few Hamdens. When we went to Hamden Corners, we came to Barrows General Store, and Charlie Barrows ran it and owned it, and his mother, Iva Barrows, lived in a very rich and fancy house next to the store property, and she was well connected because Lewis Barrows was a governor of Maine at one time, and Aunt Bertha, who was my mother's sister, my mother was Edna Leathers Folsom, and this was Bertha Leathers Gray. She was married to Harold Gray, and she was the oldest of the five in the Leathers family. And she rented the apartment over the Barrow store. And the Barrow store was the archetype of the general store, the country store. Sold everything, flour, grain, groceries, candy. And there was a set of buildings behind the store, open carriage houses, about 6 or 7 stalls. And in one of them was one of those great big old bicycles with a great big rear wheel and a little tiny front wheel. I don't know how anybody ever got up on one of those and rode it. One of the original bicycles. Also, there was an abandoned post office there, and it still had the drawers, and there were still things in the drawers, and there were receipts, but nobody was running it for many years. And I believe Charlie Barrows lived in the house opposite Aunt Iva's. The 3 buildings were there together, the Barrows store and Aunt Iva's, which was very well appointed, and Charlie Barrows, the other store, the other house, white houses, country houses, big. And so the post office had the slots. There were a lot of slots, mailboxes, and things like that. It was the decadent effects of an old post office. And on the way to Hamden Corners, we would pass the pea factory where the pea shells were emptied and canned, and then the pea shells were put out in a pile to rot, and the odor was, oh, so ugly. It was so malodorous, and how I used to dread going by the pea factory. Gordon was 4 years older than I was. And Ralph Arnold Folsom Jr., my brother, was 4 years older than Gordon. And Helene, Bertha Helene, actually, Folsom, was 4 years older than Ralph. She remained in Presque Isle and finished the normal school and became a teacher and was teaching in small town, within small town, Mars Hills, for instance. And it was so impoverished. It was so impoverished. I believe she taught in Presque Isle High School. And that's where she met Glenn Chamberlain. And she and Roger Erskine, Glenn, had a falling out. And during that time, Helene went with Glenn Chamberlain, who was a science teacher at the Presque Isle High School. And when Helene came for Christmas vacation down to Lincoln, she brought a 5-pound box of candy that Glenn Chamberlain had given her to give to me. No, I guess Glenn brought it himself, and he came down. And I liked him better than Roger because of that 5-pound box of candy. And Ralph Arnold Folsom Jr., my brother, moved out of Maine, Lincoln, Maine, and came to Bangor. On 376 Ohio Street, I believe we moved to 1903rd Street, which was off of Union Street. The YWCA was on Union Street. And that was a great big house also, with a great big barn. Between the house and the barn there had been constructed a walkway closed in from the second floor over to the second floor of the barn, and there was a bedroom there. And you passed another bedroom too. The bedroom, 2 bedrooms, the second one was in the barn, and it had bunk beds, and the other bedroom was on the hallway between, the long hallway between the house and the barn. And it had a ramp that went up to the barn, and I guess the barn was being used as a garage. And my father had a Model T. And he fixed it all up, and it was nice. As you entered the house, there was a library on the right. There was a parlor on the left. Then you came into the dining room that had a butler's pantry, and there was a small room off of the dining room. And then you came into the kitchen. And my mother rented rooms there. And had income, and I believe my father was still working as a barber at the Bangor house. I remember doing fractions in 5th grade. I remember. No. Yes. And fractions in 6th grade at the Cole Street School which was some building of the co-estate. And it was 6th grade, and I remember doing push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, pull, the Palmer method of writing, and the circles. I remember Lincoln's birthday. We drew a picture and colored it. And Washington's birthday. There was no such thing as President's Day. I remember at 6th grade that I made a resolution not to write, but to print. And that's been true all of these years. It was a little building in the middle of a huge estate. There wasn't anything around it much, except, of course, the big house. Lois Wiegand didn't live far from the co-estate. And her father was a pressman for the Bangor Daily News, so he worked all night because it was morning paper, and he slept all day. I have to insert that the Garland people, who were very, very rich, had 2 daughters and a son. And Jeannie Garland was my age, and she was in some of my classes. And her sister, who was older, and Gordon, had some sort of teenage romantic interest. The son, Joseph, was very pampered, and they lived in a great, great big house that had great big white pillars. Their grandmother lived next door, and she was the one who had all the money. She was a widow. I remember in the summertime, the Garlands, Ginny, and the sister gathered up all of us kids to go into their lavish living room. And they had a radio, great big radio, and it was at noontime Saturday. And we listened to Let's Pretend. And they had an attic playroom for the children, which was spoke of money everywhere. And we would go up there to play sometimes when they would let us in the house. And they had a servant. That was during, that was the summer between 5th grade and 6th grade. And I had my roller skates. Iron, steel roller skates. They were so noisy and so rough on the sidewalk. Lois Wiegand used to make me laugh. She would pretend that she was a teacher. And she just made me laugh and laugh and laugh. And we played after school. On 19th Street, I remember trying to learn how to ride a bicycle, but I kept falling down and kept running. I ran into a man on the sidewalk. Gordon was a friend with Donnie Severance, and Donnie's father was a fireman, a Bangor City fireman. And I believe he lived over around 5th Street. At 19th Street, we had a Victrola. You would wind it up, and it played records. And one was something about the old apple tree. The old apple tree in the orchard lives in my memory. We were happy something, something. Down, 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 down by the old apple tree. I remember on the radio, my mother was over at the neighborhood store, and this one was a fine Finest, I believe, over in the corner of Union Street